Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. This is Nikhil Parekh. In this video, I shall be giving you a recitation of my poem that is with title We Aren't Afraid. This poem of mine has been published in my book that is with title Love vs. Terrorism, Volume 1. Therefore, without wasting a further instant, wanted to commence upon with the recitation of my poem We Aren't Afraid. We aren't afraid of the treacherous mountains. In fact, keep them in our backside pockets. We aren't afraid of the freezing winds. In fact, sheltered them in a solitary whisker of our profusely poignant moustache. We aren't afraid of the lethal bullets flying horrendously around. In fact, we face them with our chests escalating unflinchingly and handsome towards the azure sky. We aren't afraid of the acrimoniously sweltering sands. In fact, caress them like a prince marching uninhibitedly towards the corridors of victory. We aren't afraid of overwhelming thirst. In fact, possess the capacity to remain without a droplet of water if the situation so demands. We aren't afraid of mighty avalanches of snow. In fact, treated them like insipid broomsticks, sticking innocuously to our valiant eyelashes. We aren't afraid of indiscriminate abuse. We aren't afraid of indiscriminate abuse. In fact, let them pass like pieces of disdainful shit. Like pieces of disdainful shit from one ear of ours to the other. We aren't afraid of the most ominous of crocodile. In fact, carried his live skin. In fact, carried his live skin intrepidly with a profound sense of equanimity on our shoulders. We aren't afraid of tumultuously vindictive storm. In fact, inhaled its merciless winds with astronomical ease through our fearless nostrils. We aren't afraid of perpetual blackness. We aren't afraid of perpetual blackness. In fact, stared at it in its uncouth eye till it wholesomely disappeared into infinitesimal wisps of non-existent sky. We aren't afraid of truckloads of blood. In fact, shed it with insurmountably supreme pride to defend the soil on which we tread since our first cry. In fact, shed it with insurmountably supreme pride to defend the soil on which we tread since our first cry. We aren't afraid of the battalion of satanic swords gushing towards our head. In fact, held them like peanuts in our palms, inscribing our names with their tips on our belligerently barren chests. We aren't afraid of excruciating pain. In fact, smiled indefatigably whilst in the heart of it, until the time our mission was blissfully accomplished. Until the time our mission was blissfully accomplished. We aren't afraid of inexplicable spirits loitering in the atmosphere. In fact, coined our own destinies. In fact, coined our own destinies. With the sweat of sweet perseverance flowing gloriously from our audaciously muscled shoulders. We aren't afraid of lecherous politics. We aren't afraid of lecherous politics. In fact, in fact, blow the manipulative leaders involved. In fact, blow the manipulative leaders involved with minuscule draughts of our drearily languid breath. With minuscule draughts of our drearily languid breath. We aren't afraid of the most horrifically traumatic aftermaths. In fact, accept them. In fact, accept them with an invincible glow, radiating resiliently from our eyes. Radiating resiliently from our eyes. We aren't afraid of sacrificing our lives at the slightest intimation. In fact, ardently waited for our chance to relinquish breath and blend our impeccable souls with the Almighty Creator. We aren't afraid of sacrificing our lives at the slightest intimation. In fact, ardently waited for our chance to relinquish breath and blend our impeccable souls and blend our impeccable souls with the Almighty Creator. Almighty Creator, with the Almighty Creator. We aren't afraid of losing our loved ones. In fact, had bid them adieu forever. In fact, had bid them adieu forever. When we plunged wholeheartedly on our path towards irrefutable righteousness. Just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Before you start thinking that we were gods. Just 1 minute. Just 1 minute before you start thinking that we were gods. Before you start thinking that we were gods. Before you start thinking that we were gods. Let me clarify. Let me clarify that we were not. Let me clarify that we were not. But we definitely take unfathomable pleasure. But we definitely take unfathomable pleasure in proclaiming ourselves to be the immortal soldiers of our motherland. But we definitely take unfathomable pleasure in proclaiming ourselves to be the immortal soldiers of our motherland. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for hearing me. From the innermost realm of my heart, wanted to thank you for the spectacularly glorious patronization to my poetry.